David here. It's a conversation with Rob, who's based in Ireland, over Zoom, and I just recorded it in that way. And it's all about how you create your own reality, the nature of consciousness, the nature of energy, and how we can use that to attract and create events into our lives. It's about an hour long. And as I say, we recorded it over Zoom, and a couple of occasions the technology failed us, just where Rob's voice went a little bit robotic over a couple of seconds, just because of the nature of the internet connection. But I've left that in. I haven't edited it. I don't want to take anything away from that conversation. So you're going to get insights and information about, if you accept that you create your own reality, what does it mean? What works? What doesn't work? What are the pitfalls? And what's some shortcuts that you can take? And I really hope that you enjoy it. If this is the kind of thing that you enjoy, then please hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified of the next conversation that we're having, which is all about the simultaneous nature of time, the nature of consciousness and the soul. And you'll be alerted to that one if you just hit that bell, and also like and subscribe to the channel. That's it. Enjoy the conversations. Take care. Hi everybody, I hope you're well. So this is the first of conversations that I'm having with Rob here. Rob is going to introduce himself because he'll do it a lot better than I will. But essentially, this is the first conversation. You may be listening to this in audio, you may be watching on a video somewhere, I don't know. Because this is the first one, then we are just going to have a conversation and explore around the really big subject of reality creation, what it is, what does it actually mean to create your own reality? And Rob's had a lot of experience in that. I have too, and we hope that you enjoy it. So without further ado, Rob, introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce myself afterwards, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, my name's Rob, and I have been interested in reality creation since I was introduced to the Seth material back in the 1980s. I first read Seth Speaks and then The Nature of Personal Reality, which were two books that a woman called Jane Roberts channeled. And I was completely riveted by this, because I'd been exploring my I suppose my spirituality, the meaning of life, I suppose the best way to put it, up until that point, without really finding anything that I really understood or really grabbed me. And the Seth material was where I had finally found something that was really interesting. And so that's how I got into it. And reality creation, which is the whole premise of the Seth material, is what I've been attempting to consciously create in the last 30 odd years, with some success and sometimes without success. But it's a journey, and it's a journey that at this point I'm feeling like I've got to a place where I understand it in a much better way than I did at the beginning. So that's just a brief resume of where I'm coming from. The other thing is that I also channel my own guide. I've been involved with a natural healing work, and I also do writing, which is in a channeled form as well. So I've explored quite a lot of different avenues, and it all came from the original exposure to the Seth material all those years ago.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, a bit like me, I mean, I bumped into the Seth material in 1990, something along those kind of lines. My own kind of journey started where I was had out-of-body experiences when I was about 3, and those continued, and it always seemed fairly obvious to me, only from those experiences, that I wasn't my body, and that my consciousness wasn't limited to my body, and that it kind of came and went, and it ebbed and flowed. And I kind of thought everybody knew that up until I got to school, and realized that wasn't the case. So from there, I bumped into the Seth material, and that gave a lot of the answers, to what I was exploring. But like yourself, Rob, because we all have our broader self. So I was doing some channeling and that type of thing. Just generally exploring. I'm intrigued by this, by the ideas, you know, that we're talking about in hopefully a series of conversations. And from there, I've been writing books and teaching and this type of thing. But I think it's just such an interesting subject to explore, you know, about the nature of consciousness and how we use it. And fundamentally, a lot of it, you know, since The Secret came along. So I think we were probably exploring before The Secret film and book and all that came along, that type of thing. It's made it a lot more popular. It's even on Netflix the other day about consciousness and this type, the scientific explorations, you know. So it's a very interesting thing, but the key is it has to be really practical. And I know that from our conversations that we had before, we're both really passionate about the idea that this stuff should be practical. You know, it should enhance our health, our wealth, our wisdom, and all those types of things, you know. So I've got a broad breadth of experience also. And today, so we're talking about what it means to create your own reality. And that's such a huge, it's such a mind-blowing concept. So we are not going to get to the end of it today by any stretch of the imagination, but just that one, you know, that one concept is, yeah, just so challenging. So what do you think? Where should we start with? You create your own reality. What do you think?
Well, for me, it's yeah, what does that actually mean? You know, what does that mean? And to me, it means that a whole load of things which we take for granted before we understand this are no longer valid. What Seth calls one-line official consciousness, the consensus reality. You know, you start with, well, I create my own reality. It's not, nothing is random, nothing is an accident. And that's a very, very important place to start with. And then as you read the Seth material, you understand that your thoughts, and particularly thoughts that you hold with a very, very, with regularity, with a lot of emotional content, which he refers to as beliefs, those are what you manifest in physical reality. So to begin with, it can be a little overwhelming, because I think you feel, oh my God, I create my reality. Oh my God, look, I look at my reality and I see all of the things that I haven't created very well. And then I start to feel responsible. But it's not about blame. It's not about going, oh, look what a terrible reality I've created. It's not about that. It's about understanding that because you create your reality, that you can change it. Seth talks about, refers to it like as a painting. You know, you do a painting, you don't like it, wipe it out, do a new painting. And that's what it's all about. It's about, first of all, claiming your own power. But I think what the problem I had initially was that I was quite hard on myself. I felt, yeah, I did go down that road of going, well, I haven't created a very good reality, and I want to create a new and better one. How do I go about it? How do I change these beliefs? And I started doing the exercises recommended in Seth Speaks, and also in The Nature of Personal Reality, the two books which I would really recommend to anyone who wants to start out with this stuff. Who, if you haven't read these books, these are the books you need to start with. And I realized it was a bit more difficult than just doing it. It was going to take a bit more effort and I think for myself, and this is by no way an excuse, but I had, and of course I understood more about this later when I got to understand about the fact that time is really not linear. But at the beginning, I felt quite at the mercy of my past. My mother died when I was 6 years old, my father remarried, and my stepmother was a sort of classic, awful stepmother. And I had a fairly traumatized childhood after my mother died when I was 6. So I felt quite burdened by this, and being English, expressing my emotions, releasing my emotions, was not something that was, given to me. So basically, I had a lot of repressed emotions. I developed quite a few physical symptoms, and it was after the getting in touch with the Seth material that I also got in touch with various different types of healers who were not quite as in touch with the create your own reality concept as I would have liked. And in a way, it kind of delayed my really coming into my own power, but it was very, very helpful because it helped me realize that you can release the deeper causes, the beliefs for the illnesses or emotional upsets or whatever it is in your life. So it's been a big process. It continues to be a process, but I have to say that I feel it, the Seth material and what I've learned from it has probably been the big game changer in my whole life. And I feel that my life really has been devoted to self-healing, but also helping others heal stuff in their own lives. And I think one other thing is that, and I've learned over the years, is that the importance of compassion with oneself in the process. As I am able to be more compassionate and loving with myself, as I go through this process, it becomes a hell of a lot easier, because it's so easy to be hard on yourself. And that is a very, very common belief. You know, we don't believe that we're worthy and deserving people. Yeah. And once you can incorporate that and integrate that into your life, things can really start to happen, along with many other things. Anyhow.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great introduction. Yeah, I mean, I think I've written a few comments down here, or just words, if you like, and I think the main thing for me from what you're saying, and it's absolutely true, is, you know, a lot of people will approach the idea of reality creation whilst being so harsh on themselves. I remember doing quite a lot of classes, you know, kind of face to face in quite large groups, saying, you know, you create your own reality. And I said, how do you feel about that, to people? And I think probably in all the time I've been teaching, it's only 3 people went, amazing. Everybody else went, you know. And I think that's because of this fundamental idea that we're not worthy, you know, and that our tendency to focus on problems. And I think that is one thing that's really, you know, at whatever stage you're at of reality creation, you know, even if you're just bumping into it, or if you're a bit further down the line, I think if things aren't flowing, whatever that means to us, you know, within our own personal experience, if things aren't moving in the right direction, I think a really good thing to look at is the level of self-compassion you have, the level of kind of self-forgiveness, just forgiving yourself, you know, that for the past, forgiving other people also in the way. Certainly, from the sound of it, I think you had a more challenging upbringing than I did. But certainly, being English, my mother being English, there was no touchy. There was no emotional, you know. So actually, you know, that caused a lot of problems in the relationship with my one of my parents. You know, so. But again, I think being compassionate is an it's an undiscovered area of reality creation that's not talked about a lot. I think a lot of people do talk about their beliefs. You know, your beliefs create your experience. Law of attraction, get what you focus on. And I think that that's really, if you can combine the compassion with the work, and it is massive work, isn't it? You know, the massive work of sifting through your beliefs and ideas If you do that without self-compassion, you are going to struggle, and very little will change. I find a lot of people go around in loops. And I think if people are doing that, so they might be doing some work with their beliefs, but the same things keep coming back again and back again. I think that's sometimes a significant kind of self-instruction somewhere that actually you need to be a bit more compassionate with yourself. It's almost like giving yourself permission for it to work, So yeah, really interesting. And a couple of other things is the idea of the one line of consciousness. I think that's where the Seth material has exploded, just as quantum physics is right now. Multiple realities and simultaneous time and all those types of things. I think although they are a bit conceptual, I think in reality terms they do free you up. Certainly, I know in my experience. So what would you say? What would you say? A few of the most important lessons you've learned. So we got, to be compassionate. Yeah. What about the idea of, how do you work through your beliefs and your emotions? How does that work for you?
Well, to begin with, I just had the books, and then my sister-in-law, who was really the person who introduced me to the whole idea, she and I used to have. I would only meet up with her twice a year because she lived in the States, and she would come over to Ireland where I live. And we developed this technique, which we referred to as belief busting.
Okay.
And if we had an issue, which of course we always did have issues, because everyone has issues, one of us, and if the person who was most in need would be the sort of receiver and would just talk about what was going on. And the other person would have a notebook and would write down everything that was said. And of course, when I was talking, or if she was talking, she would say things that were clearly beliefs. They felt like they were facts, because especially the very core beliefs, the very deeply held beliefs. And it took that exposure of those beliefs and having somebody else writing them down to kind of expose what the beliefs were. Now, I would say one of the most important things is self-awareness. Without self-awareness, you're not really going to be able to go anywhere, because you have to be able to separate yourself from the beliefs. You have to realize that beliefs aren't facts, and you have to also remember that beliefs can be changed, and that's how you change. Well, that's one of the ways in which reality is changed. It's a very important part of it. There's other bits as well, but that to me was absolutely crucial. So over the years, and it did take quite a long time, because I say we only met up twice a year, we would kind of go into the various areas, and once we had uncovered what the limiting beliefs were, I never used to like calling them negative, because I felt they were limitations. Once we'd uncovered the limitations, then we would come up with some pithy phrases that would be the exact opposite of, for example, if it transpired, which it did on many times, that we really didn't value ourselves, we didn't really feel that we deserved to have everything going well, we would come up with an affirmation or a pithy new belief that would be, I'm a worthy and deserving person. That's a particularly good one, I think. And then every day for 5 to 10 minutes, we would attempt, not always very successfully, but to repeat the phrase, imagine the emotional intensity of what it would be like to feel worthy and deserving. And we would do that for a period of time, and we would, in a way, wait to see how that what happened in reality. Now, what would happen with me was that sometimes it would kind of take, if you know what I mean, the new belief, but other times it took quite a few goes at it to really kind of cement itself. And I think because there were so many beliefs that I was investigating, that I held this I'm worthy and deserving belief, but I also held the other belief, the opposite belief. I hadn't really let go of that other belief completely. So it was a bit like driving with the accelerator and the brake. I would kind of move forward, but then I wouldn't move forward, and I'd be kind of lurching along, and then I would get disheartened, and then I would try again. So it was a bit lurchy, but I think gradually over the years, I really started to notice, actually, I am feeling quite a bit better. I am feeling, yes. And then I would look around me and go, well, it's amazing that thing happened. And I mean, that wouldn't happen to a person who didn't believe he was worthy, you know. And I think another thing would happen. And I think another important thing at that point, perhaps, was I think I began to understand how important gratitude was. And that I had to, in a way, focus on the new expansive belief, but I also had to take the energy away from the old belief as well. It was kind of a complex thing, but just simply put, focus on what you want and try not to focus on what you don't want, would be a very good way to explain it. Just to imagine what it would be like in that probability, where you are feeling much more expansive and creative, and use the imagination as well as the affirmations. And I think to begin with, what slowed me down a bit was that I only used the words. I didn't really completely imagine. And part of me didn't really believe it, didn't believe that the process was going to work. And I kind of hassled it. I wanted it to be now, but I realized actually I had to spend some time at it. So impatience wasn't great, but it was a learning lesson. Gratitude really, really helped. And noticing when things started to go well and go, yay, this is fantastic. Things are actually working now. And building on that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot in there. Yeah. And that's and I mean, the interesting thing is that's very similar to my experience. That's exactly, my experience of it, which is that holding two conflicting beliefs at one time will stifle you. And do you know what I mean? So if you're working on, so say if I was working on finance or health or whatever it is, and nothing happened, then it's because I must have a conflicting belief going on. There must be something stopping it, because I've learned now to have a great deal more of expectation about it working. And that's because I've kind of learned to get out of my way. I've learned to put, as you say, not just, that is why affirmations in themselves don't work. They just don't work, because you could sit there all day, won't make a blind bit of difference if the opposite belief, if you have, to the affirmation you're saying isn't resolved, then nothing will happen at all. And I think that is quite a shame for a lot of people who do a lot of these things. Nothing happens, and so they kind of settle for, I created a car parking space. They settle for a little bit too little, to my mind. And I really want to encourage people to have bigger expectations. And I think they come when you start to get these ideas. So just to recap what you said, which is, perfect, this idea of that when you focus on something, you add your emotion in. That gets the universe, your consciousness, working in the right direction. If nothing happens, I mean, I normally give it a week, if I'm honest. And the first feedback I generally get is that I feel better. If I'm working on something and I feel better, that is feedback for me. So, okay, I'm feeling a bit better about this. That's always good. I then acknowledge that, exactly as you've said. And by acknowledging it, I'm grateful for it. So it builds the energy and it gets a bit stronger. And then I begin to acknowledge other changes that happen, however small. So if something happens, like you say, you begin to acknowledge it, something happens, I celebrate those changes, however small that they. So if I'm focusing on money, and if I found a penny, I'd be delighted, because that would add the weight to my, okay, because, as we kind of saying right at the start, this whole new idea is that there are no accidents. And that's one of the key things to, as we say. So first one, yeah, conflicts, affirmations, add in your emotional energy. I've just got some notes here. Don't have conflicting beliefs. If things aren't moving, go back to your beliefs again. And I think the key, I think for me, in my experience, is that theoretically this is easy. Theoretically you go, oh yeah, of course I can change my idea, my thoughts anytime I like. But actually the reality of it is we have so many thoughts. I mean, if I ever try and sit and meditate, I am bombarded, I'm swamped with thoughts. So I think it is a process of simplification and that type of thing. I think that's really key. So do you have any kind of real life examples that you can share? Because I think that's I've got a couple that I found interesting. But anything you want to share? Yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to think about something that would be yes, I think you should go first, because I've just suddenly gone blank.
You've gone blank. No worries. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most fun examples I had was where because I've been teaching this for a while, and so other people would say, oh, yeah, this is 20 years ago or whatever it was, and we went to a fair once with a bunch of friends who were kind of poo-pooing this idea again long before The Secret came out or that type of thing, and I said, okay, well, give me a challenge then. And if I do this challenge and it succeeds, will you? I wasn't trying to convert them. It's just like they knew that I was, I had this view on the world. And they said, okay, well, and it was a coconut shy. So we'll get 3 coconuts. If you knock down 3 coconuts. So I took that on. I thought, okay, all right, I've been living this and trying this and exploring this and teaching this for a while. So I went up on the first one, knocked it off. But what I did was a short version of what you expressed there, which is I put the belief that I could do it. I focused my intention. So it wasn't just an affirmation. I built up my, how will it feel to do this type thing? And then I expected something to happen, all in the short walk from picking up the 3 balls from the vendor, paying my money, and had my mates over the back. Most of them, I think, actually didn't want me to succeed, if I'm honest, in the back of their mind. They thought, we'll prove this guy wrong. And so the first one went down. Everyone said it's luck. But that happens with other things too, doesn't it? If we're trying to consciously create a reality and we do one thing, we can easily put that down to luck. And I think that's not a good thing to do. So the second one went up, knocked it down again. And then I was getting nervous because I thought, this is too good to be true, if you like. So I had to check that. And then I did the third one, knocked them all down. And of course, they all went a bit bonkers. I tried to remain calm. And throughout, we were at this fair. Throughout this fair, I did the same thing. Somebody wanted me to win some money on a bet with somebody, out of 10 numbers you could choose which one. So I did. So I was on a roll. And but it combined all the stuff you're talking about, and I've done some stuff around health and that type of thing. But I think the key was, for a lot of people that were observing it, they didn't believe it afterwards anyway. You know what I mean? There's this idea of going, it's like until you're ready, you're not ready. You know what I mean? So, but for me, it was a great lesson. I hold on to that every day, to be able to try and reenact those and that use of consciousness. So that's one of my examples. So what about yourself? Any come to mind?
Yes. While you were talking, I remember. I mean, there are actually probably hundreds of them, but for some reason, I just couldn't think of one. Yes, this was a very practical issue. That was in my day job is I'm a potter. I'm a studio potter. I make my living from producing domestic ware, and I've been doing that for most of my life anyhow. And I have a wood-fired kiln. Because I just love how the effects from wood firing, and it's an amazing way to fire pottery, because you get these beautiful random effects, and you get lots of lovely sort of so-called accidents and spontaneous things happening. But firing the kiln is quite an arduous and difficult thing. It goes on for at least 12 hours. You have to be at the kiln stoking on wood from 5 o'clock in the morning, often till 5 o'clock at night if you're lucky, but often it might go on as late as 7 or whatever. And I realized that we were getting quite a lot of firings, whereas quite a lot of what was coming out of it really wasn't that great. And I felt that I had a belief that was in a way affecting this. And I realized that it might have been the tension that I was feeling during the firing. So I decided to just look at that belief, and I came up with the new belief was that I fire the kiln in a relaxed and successful way. Okay, and I did this. For me, I need to be doing it for at least 3 weeks. You might see something sooner, but I think 3 weeks, maybe even longer, it's necessary to kind of really get the belief and get the, make the change, basically. And I only fired, well, at that time I was firing the kiln about 6 times a year, so I had plenty of time in between firings. And we had 2 or 3 firings where there's always been some problem. A glaze had gone wrong, or pots had fallen over in the kiln, or there was some cracking, or there was just problems. Okay, so I started doing this affirmation and this belief work, and the very next firing, I noticed myself starting to feel a bit tense, I'm not sure what was going on. The kiln was behaving a bit differently, and I just once again brought my attention back into what the new belief was. And the results of that firing were considerably better. And then for the next firing, I did it again, and I realized after 2 or 3 firings that not only was I much more relaxed during the process of the firing, but actually the results, and I'd already been making pots for about 20 years at this point, the results were coming out absolutely spectacular. We were having some firings where the glazes that need a very slight variation of temperature to be either good or just kind of okay, we were getting firings where things were coming out really brilliantly. Now, not every time, but enough for me to significantly feel this is good. And also, I was enjoying the process of firing so much more because I was trusting that it was all going to work out okay, even if we had some minor faults. But the whole process of the firing, I was experiencing it without that anxiety. And I think that is so often the case in life, is that we can be going through life, and because we don't really trust reality, because we have that lack of belief in the safe universe, which is another very important concept, we are nervous that things are going to go bad. And I think that's, once again, this whole thing about reality creating is that, you either create your reality or you don't create it. And if you create it, then it means that everything you experience, you have created. But you want to create it within the safe universe, which is another Sethian concept, which is a very important one as far as I'm concerned. So it really helped me. The firing process became better. The pottery seemed to come better. I felt more relaxed about the whole thing. The business seemed to take off much more. It wasn't so hard for us to make a living. And although there were ups and downs, I generally felt like, having changed that particular belief, had really made quite a marked difference in my life. And I would enjoy firing the kiln, and I do to this day. I still love doing it. Sometimes there's trouble, but at least I feel like I can just trust that it's all working out. I think that to me is a very good sign that one's reality is creating is going quite well, is that you feel a sense of things are unfolding, a sense of excitement, a sense of joyful exhilaration, you know, that not that you have to be wildly happy all the time, but there's just as an underlying feeling that you are supported by the universe. And I know we're getting into lots of different concepts here, but it is that's what reality creation is. It's like you start off with one thing and it just leads to, and they all help you move through life in a much more joyful and successful way, whatever you deem as success. Now, I wouldn't deem success necessarily as financial security, but it's very nice. But to me, to feel happy and creative and to have things that I really love to do, that is definitely something to aim for. And I think reality creation, conscious reality creation, has really helped me with that. And yeah, that's my
Yeah, sure.
my story.
Yeah. I mean, it's so many. There's a bit of lag on the. If you're watching this, there's a bit of lag on the somewhere, but we didn't miss too many words. So, but and it's all, you know, and I think the main thing I took from that, again, you know, the interesting thing for me is that, you know, as you're speaking, it is mirroring my experience. So that's really good. You know, if I'm talking to people about it and talking about things that I'm doing, it's really good when you're, because these aren't common conversations, are they? You know, to talk in this level about consciousness and real, do you know what I mean? So it is interesting to bump into the fairly few people, I think, that have been exploring it seriously and playfully. You know, that there are commonalities in it, and I'll just reiterate a few of them that I made some notes in. So the first one is you've got to trust reality. If you don't, you know, you've got to believe that you're creating a safe universe. If you don't, I think Einstein said that as well, didn't he? I think somewhere that he said, you know, you've got to choose. Is your universe supporting you or is it not? And I think if anybody listening to this thinks about that, even on non-reality creation terms, you're going to head off in two completely different life paths. If you believe and trust reality, you will head off on a much more positive, and I'd say probably easier life path than if you don't trust reality. I think that's an absolute choice. And in the terms that you're talking about it, we're talking about it, then that's a belief. So obviously, if you believe you can trust reality and that you're safe within that, then again, that's another boost to your own creative ability. You know, and if we go back a couple of 20 minutes ago, we were saying, you know, if you can be compassionate with yourself, and now you're adding the idea that you create your own reality and that it's trustworthy, you know, those two are really essential keys to I think to have the sense of it unfolding rather than being forced. You know, I have been in situations where I felt as though I'm pushing a bit too hard, you know, or I'm just focusing too much and I'm not getting anywhere. And then I've come back and realized it's that I don't feel safe somewhere, you know. And also the other one is that you said that absolutely true is, you know, either you accept this idea or you don't. And I think that's really key for people. You know, if you accept the law of attraction as a concept, you know, which is a basic concept from what we're talking about, but if you accept that your thoughts create your reality and your events, then if you accept it wholeheartedly, then you accept all the successes, like from the firing that you did. You know, it's like it gives you permission to go, you know what, I did that because no other person can do that because I create my reality. And I always found that adds to the confidence. It removes the idea of luck out of the equation, not spontaneity, but luck. And like with my three coconut, you know, that could only have been me because I create my own reality. You know what I mean? And that was again gave me some confidence. So yeah, really interesting. And like I say, not to focus on. I think if things don't happen quick enough, I don't know in your experience, but if things don't happen quick enough, then I think I have in the past tended to get impatient, and that heads me down a journey where actually I start to focus on the wrong thing. You know, I focus on the impatience and why is it not working, and of course I've ruined the recipe. You know, I've sullied the pot, because as soon as I do that, I'm not focusing on the thing I want to create. You know.
Yes, I think impatience is, yeah, it doesn't help. It really doesn't help. I mean, impatience, and I can get impatience as well, and frustrated and thinking, oh, you know, I've been doing this for so many years, you know, why isn't it working? And then, and I this has happened so many times where I've got really sort of, I've ended up sort of getting mad at myself and thinking, yes, well, I ought to know better by now and all the rest of it. And then inevitably, a few days later, something happens and I kind of go, oh, I should have just relaxed. You know, I didn't need to get into this great big thing about, oh, it's not working. And the doubt, you know, the self-doubt comes in, which of course is a perfectly normal human, you know, experience. We all doubt at times, you know, it's impossible to be 100% there all the time. But I think over the years for myself, I've had this experience where I've doubted and it's all turned out okay. And I look back on my life and I kind of go, well, actually, all of those things that because I do have a tendency to worry about things. And I keep on thinking, 99% of the things that I worried about never happened. And in actual fact, so many really, really good things happened. And I created them, you know. And the more I realized that I was creating actually some really great things. So I think it's very easy when you get into it, is to sort of get into this perfectionist kind of thing. Like, if my life isn't completely perfect, I'm not doing it right. But it's not about that. It's actually about learning to experience life and to accept what comes to you as opportunities to learn something more about life. Because if you come in, I mean, I find this with people who are perfectionists, you know, real perfectionists. It's like, well, if you're a perfectionist, why are you here? You know, the whole reason for life is to learn. You make mistakes and then you learn again, and you progress, and you make you know, you begin to get to an understanding of life. But then again, of course, if you're into the Seth stuff, which I am, then you're talking about cause and effect, and linear time. And that, I think, is something that I've only recently really begun to understand, is the idea that we actually create our reality in the present moment, and that we're not slaves to what's happened in the past. And I think that's it's quite a difficult concept for people to understand, because we're so caught up in what Seth would refer to as the camouflage reality, which by that is what he means is that we're sort of hypnotized by physical reality, by our life. Everything seems solid and permanent. But even science now says, you know, if you actually, you know, if you go take things down to an atomic level, you know, mainly there's space, and there's a few sort of solid things in between there. And so I think the idea of creating in the present is a very, very important thing. What are your thoughts about that, David?
Yeah, I agree. I think I mean, it's so multi-layered, this stuff, isn't it? You know, I think it kind of builds on itself, and then this understanding of time, or the lack of it, actually, time being a core belief, you know, a construction of our own mind, which science would tell you as well, you know, that it's constructed by us, that our reality isn't really based in time, but our consciousness puts it in that order, which is mind-blowing in itself. You know, to say that and accept that ourselves, that nothing we're experiencing is solid, nor is it based in time, in itself is like, can blow your face off. You know, you go, like, really? You know, it's just so, it's, you know, when I look at my phone and my computer, it's just so solid, you know, and it's so, I think from, I mean, I've written a few things down again, you know, I think to come back a couple of steps, you know, if you are able to accept the power to do the things that we're talking about here, then that's one thing. So, okay, I accept that my thoughts create my experience, and I'm going to attempt to accept that wholeheartedly. Because I would suggest anybody watching this who's half in and half out of that, get all in. Because the worst place to be is where you go, did I create that? Or did they create that? Or was that an accident? Or do you know what I mean? It's like you're gonna bake your noodle. You know, so my advice on that level is all in or all out. You know, one or the other. And I would suggest all in, because that's actually what's happening here. But I think once you begin to embrace the kind of things that we're talking about here, then you get to this idea of, okay, I know that I accept intuitively that my thoughts create things. Then you've got to have a look at, well, what is reality? Which is kind of where that leans into that, doesn't it? You go, well, what is this place then? Do you know what I mean? If I accept my thoughts create things, and I've got experience of that, as every single person on the planet has experience of coincidences, bar none. And psychic experience, bar none. You know, everyone will experience it. You then get into this idea of what is reality and therefore what is time. You know what I mean? And that's where our noodles get a little bit more baked, where we start to have to accept that use the term camouflage, which is, you know, what Seth terms, you know, that it is camouflage, you know, that there's a reality behind this, you know, that is outside of physical reality, if you like, and that time is included in that. And that's where I think the challenge is, as you say, you know, one of the main Seth tenets, and it's true if you think about, if you accept that time is not linear, it's simultaneous, which is, I think maybe the next discussion we'll talk about time. I think probably that's where it's going to end up going. So, but if you accept that, you go, well, what does that mean about my past? You know, what does that mean about my memories? What does that mean about who I am? And what it touches on is the nature of identity. You know what I mean? It's like, because if we look at people who have Alzheimer's and that type of thing, who don't remember anything, then who are they? Somebody said that to me fairly recently. They go, well, do you know what I mean? It's like our memories are such a huge part of who we are. And I think that goes all the way back to one of the first things you said, which is so useful to realize that we only remember kind of one line, one distinct, valid version story of who we are. And that if we remove that by thinking about the nature of time and that type of thing, we feel a bit lost. And I think at some point, once you begin to experience your broader nature and reality in a different way, that vacuum kind of gets filled. But I think there is definitely, for me and other people, I don't know about you that I talk to, where, you know, once you lose the idea that you're not your past and or your future, or even your present, really, because you're much more than that, it's like, well, you know, how do I go to work the next day? Do you know what I mean? How do I remain in this relationship where there is a past? We have a past. Do I have a, you know? So yeah, I think we're knocking on the door of another subject. Yeah. So yeah, so
yes, I think yes, I think you're absolutely right here. I mean, I think the nature of this, what we're embarking on here is you know, it one thing does lead to another, and I definitely think that we should have another big discussion about time and the spacious present and all of these various other things. I think when you were talking about identity and being overwhelmed by this feeling that time is linear time is a bit of an illusion that we've chosen to participate in because we've chosen to be physical, which is a whole other subject here of who were we before we arrived in this reality. But I think this is for another time. Mm-hmm. But I would just say that the inner self and realizing that you are in whose body you're in at this particular point. I think when you begin to connect with your entity, your soul, or your inner self, and you feel that solidity within that, I think then these concepts about time and sort of letting go of those is much, much easier, because it's not just the ego you sort of left, alone in the universe. It's like you're in a safe universe, you're protected, you're guided, you're at all times, that the universe is a benevolent place, which is very contrary to the one-line official consciousness, which basically tells you that it's all random, that you don't have any control, life happens, shit happens, and you die, and all those awful things that we're exposed to, and we have to basically just dismiss, as far as I'm concerned. Sometimes quite hard because they bombard you with it all, but I've got better at it over the years. But I think this understanding that we are far more than just the self that we are at this time enables us to be able to explore these ideas of time and what that means.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I think we move from this concept of you create your own reality, which is what we're talking about today, the nature of beliefs and how that works and how you can begin to get into there. But then it does lend itself into, once you get once you get an experience of your broader nature, your expanded nature, it's okay that time isn't linear. In fact, it's a blessing. You know what I mean? It for me, that's what happens. It turns itself into something different. But I think what we'll do now is, we've been about 40 minutes, something like that. So just so if we round off, I think probably on this particular one, and the next one, we'll talk about time, and we'll get into that, because that's a great subject. So, but just a couple of things then I made a whole bunch of notes here, but what advice would you give anybody? So first of all, what advice would you give somebody who's just starting out?
Well, I would definitely say read the first two Seth books, because to me they are the absolute essential reading. I would advise the person to try some of the exercises in the book, and I would try, if possible, to find other people who are doing the same thing and who've been doing it a bit longer, so that you can get a bit of support. The one thing that I didn't have when I started out all those years ago, I didn't have enough support with it. I didn't have enough people to talk to about it on a regular basis. And there are now Facebook groups, there are online Zoom groups, which we're part of, where you can get some support and get some ideas, get some feedback, and get some questions answered, so that you don't have to do it on your own. And just very gently try changing some very easy beliefs to begin with. That's what I would suggest. And following the exercises given in the first two Seth books. And just another thing I would suggest is paying attention to any little hunches or impulses or little kind of ideas that come into your mind quite spontaneously. You don't necessarily have to act on them, but you could write them down and just kind of see, oh, that was interesting. I I got that urge to do that, and I got this urge to do that, because that is your inner self talking to you. And I think another really important thing, which we'll talk about next time, I think, is connecting with your inner self, connecting with the greater part of yourself. So I think those two things to start off would be something I'd recommend.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd reiterate that. So that's The Nature of Personal Reality and Seth Speaks. I think it starts with Seth Speaks and The Nature of Personal Reality. So Seth, in case you don't know, is a channel source back in the mid-60s, I think, something like that. And the work, it's the best body of work on the nature of reality, that highfalutin term, that there is. It's the most amazing material. So Seth Speaks is the first one, then The Nature of Personal Reality. And again, I think, yeah, just ease your way in, ease your way in and just commit to it, commit to the exploration and have some fun with it. I think that's probably one of the things I'd advise. And yeah, maybe go back and listen to some of the key things. I think the key things that I pulled out for today, which you hopefully some of which you said, some of which I said, which is one, start to believe that you are in a safe universe. Even though your senses might go, hang on a minute, you've got to be kidding. When you believe you're in a safe universe, then you quite literally are. I don't lock my car, I don't lock my house, I haven't for years, and it really does work to smooth out the edges of your reality creation. The second one is to be kind to yourself. I think that's a really good starting point for people, and use gratitude when things do go your way, because energetically you build that on. So there we go. So whether if you're listening to this on a podcast or the audio, we've had a bit of, we're zooming, so we've had a few kind of come in, but not enough that you wouldn't be able to understand it. So that's absolutely fine. So great conversation, one done. I think next time we'll do time.
Yes.
Time. Wow. Next one we'll do time. So wherever you're at, have a great day. And yeah, thank you, Rob. Thanks for the chat. Very interesting. And thank you, everybody, for watching or listening. That's it. Take care.